my name's Caroline Silva, and I'm the VP of Global Marketing here at invenioLSI. Today, I'm joined by Nicole Smith, our Procurement Solution Architect for our Guidance for Success video series. So Nicole, thanks for being here today. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do at invenioLSI and your experience with SAP?
Thanks, Caroline. It's so good to catch up with you today here. So I am going to talk today about SRM and the transition over into Ariba for procurement. My background is SRM. I spent the last 20 or so years working with the various flavors of procurement in SAP. And so we're going to spend time today talking about how do we get from SRM into SAP Ariba.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicole. You certainly have a ton of experience in your field, so we're really excited to hear from you today. Today, Nicole will be sharing with us some information about procurement and the options for transitioning from SRM to SAP's latest and greatest. So Nicole, let's just go ahead and dive in. So what advice would you give for how to approach a transition from SRM?
So there's a few things to consider. So let's start with the discussion about the move itself. Start that sooner than later, right? And the second thing to know is that there are options for timing. So as you're discussing this and as you're thinking through the timing, know that you don't have to do everything all at once. The third thing to know is the process to implement SAP Ariba is streamlined and it's much more straightforward, so it's not nearly as challenging as other implementations, and that makes a big difference, especially for public sector, because most public sector organizations don't have the extra staff to dedicate to a project.
Awesome. Yeah, good points. And I totally agree with you that starting the conversation sooner rather than later is always the right move, right? I think that's just like a life lesson that we can all
Definitely.
take. So say like I'm a customer, right? And I know that we need to move from SRM. Can you give me advice on some highlights or key changes that I can expect?
Definitely. So procurement is centered around the SAP Business Network. That serves as a central hub for communication between your suppliers and your buyers. And the connectivity is much simpler than it has been in a long time for electronic communication. And by electronic communication, I don't mean just sending an email with an attachment of a purchase order to it. I mean truly the either XML-based or EDI-based communication with your suppliers. From a shopper's perspective, so they are gaining an intuitive shopping tool. Catalog access and non-catalog access is simple. The system enforces error checks, right? And there are real-time checks for funds management and grants management budgets. And that's key. I think that's overlooked a lot of times where either the budget checks are not real-time, or if you're integrating to a third-party system, the third-party system might not have the data it's needed to properly handle funds management and grants management budget checks. So that's the shopper's perspective, but we can't forget about the procurement department themselves, right? You need to manage your vendors, your solicitations, your contracts. These functions have been streamlined for the procurement department, and it includes things like allowing procurement to include end users in the process, especially, for example, the contracting process. A lot of times it's difficult to get the information the buyer needs from the end user without losing it in email or on a voicemail. Now you can assign tasks to end users within your community and even with the vendor to gather up the information, and those tasks have reminders, they have deadlines, and you can track them. That's one of just the many things that is a big benefit of moving into SAP Ariba.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicole. And I noticed in your answer you talk a little bit about the SAP Business Network. And so for our audience, can you give us an overview of what the SAP Business Network is?
Absolutely. Yes. So the SAP Business Network is probably one of the most valuable innovations in the procurement community. Think of the network as a trading partner portal, right? It's a place where you connect with your suppliers. And today we're focusing on the procurement, but the business network enables electronic processing for procurement, logistics, and assets. So there's a lot there. And if you think about the value of the network, right, the value is, like I mentioned before, in the effort that it traditionally takes to set up electronic communications, not just an email with an attachment, but truly an XML or an EDI-based communication with a vendor. Now, historically, that takes some time to set up on a one-by-one basis with each vendor. Now, if you scale that up for 50, 100, 500 vendors, sometimes the effort doesn't justify the cost, and our customers only have a handful of vendors that they're truly doing electronic communication with. With the business network, your suppliers are already part of the network. There are over 5.5 million suppliers on the business network, which means they have decided how they want to communicate with customers, and they've set up the protocol already. So now when a customer joins the business network, they make one connection to the network, and now they have access to as many suppliers as they can find on the network. So that really is a central point of communication. The network also becomes part of the RFX process, the contracting process. Documents are passing back and forth across the network constantly. So you really get a lot of value and communication points, right, connections with your suppliers very early on.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. I love like having the vendors in one area, having them set up, one time, and then you're kind of all set. Just saves a ton of time, which I know everyone is kind of strapped for these days, right? So,
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that overview. And, lastly, I really want to talk about project success, right? So given your experience, what can an organization do to prepare themselves for Ariba?
Oh, that's a good question. There's a couple things that I think are critical. One of the first thing is to find your internal experts, right, and include them in your project. Another piece of advice for success is to take advantage of the standardized processes. That's not to say that you can't customize and make processes work for you, but there are a lot of processes that are working very well and very efficiently within SAP Ariba. So take advantage of those. And the last point I think that's critical to success, and this touches a little bit on organizational change management, but things like highlight the positives with your shoppers and your purchasing agents to build momentum and support. Some of the positives I mentioned earlier, easy catalog access for your shoppers, simple screens with the most frequent features right out front, great mobile interface for your shoppers. It's very intuitive, and people that I have demoed it to say, oh, well, why wouldn't we just use the mobile interface? It's fantastic. From your purchasing agent's perspective, highlight to them that the contracting process and the ability to assign tasks and the ability to simplify the contracting process saves them a ton of time. Then there's a robust sourcing engine. Point out the highlights of how you can set up your RFXs and communication and the ease of connecting with suppliers. And the third thing for the purchasing agents are customizable dashboards. The dashboards are built in, but the purchasing agents can make them work just the way they want, so they can support their day-to-day activities. The minute they walk in the door, they have a nice layout of everything right in front of them. So sharing that information with users up front always builds support.
Awesome. And not to mention planning your timeline, right?
Absolutely. Start that conversation now. Start that conversation now. You can either take the plunge and do everything all at once, or we can piece it out into a manageable, high return functionality pieces that work for our customers. So there are lots of options there.
Awesome. That's so great. So, there you have it, right? Some insight into procurement from a longtime SAP implementer and champion. Nicole, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate your insight on all of this. I'm sure we can talk more, do another one of these one day. There's just so much to talk about to this space, but for more information, you can connect with us on social media. You can visit our website at www.invenioLSI.com. View this video on YouTube, share with your friends, coworkers, and until next time, I'm Caroline Silva. Thank you so much for watching.